She wasn't loud. She didn't make a scene. She simply stepped forward, ticket in hand, to the glass doors of the VIP lounge, her shoulders tired from travel, her steps calm, composed. But before her fingers could even reach the scanner, a man in uniform blocked her path. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," he said, not bothering to ask for her boarding pass, not bothering to look past the surface. People glanced up from their champagne glasses. A few smirked. One woman whispered, "She probably took a wrong turn." And just like that, without a word, without even realizing, they made a decision about who she was, and more importantly, who she wasn't. But what happened next would make every single person in that lounge rethink everything, because this woman, this quiet, unbothered black woman, didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply reached into her bag and revealed a badge. A badge that made the guard step back. A badge that left the room in silence. A badge that shattered every assumption in that room. You see, this wasn't just about a lounge. This was about what we see and what we choose not to. This was about dignity, assumptions, and the quiet power of knowing who you are. And when you hear her full story, it might just change the way you walk into a room, because sometimes the most powerful person is the one you least expect. It started on a Sunday, the kind where the airport smells like coffee and worn leather suitcases. She had just landed after a red-eye flight, 12 hours in the air. No sleep and a connecting flight in 2 more. She wasn't wearing designer heels or a tailored suit, just a gray hoodie, worn jeans, and a laptop bag that had been with her for over a decade. To most people, she looked ordinary, forgettable even. But beneath that hoodie was a story. A long road paved with resilience, with excellence, with battles fought in silence. And a badge that wasn't just metal, it was memory, it was meaning. This is her story. And if you stay with me, I promise it's not just hers. It's ours. Before we begin, if this story makes you feel something, anger, hope, pride, or maybe a bit of all three, don't forget to like and share it with someone who still believes in quiet power. Because stories like this, they travel farther when we pass them on. It was the kind of room designed to make people feel special. Leather chairs, dim lights, free champagne on ice, and a frosted glass door with 3 bold letters at the top, VIP. It didn't just separate a room, it separated people. The US from the them. That's the strange thing about lounges like this. They don't just offer comfort, they create assumptions about who deserves to be there and who doesn't. Not always because of rules, sometimes just because of how someone looks. She wasn't the first to feel it. Maybe you felt it too, like the man who wore a maintenance uniform to a luxury store and got followed by security, or the elderly black couple who boarded first class only to be asked, "Are you sure you're in the right line?" It's not the door that stops you. It's the doubt in people's eyes. And on that day when she walked toward the lounge, the door didn't reject her. The people did, but here's the truth. No lounge, no velvet rope, no polished floor can define your worth. Because sometimes the person on the other side of the door has more power in their silence than anyone in the room knows. And the man guarding that door, he was about to learn that lesson in the quietest and most unforgettable way. Because what he saw wasn't the whole story, and what she revealed next would silence every whisper in that room. Let's talk about that moment and why what people saw wasn't who she really was. They saw a black woman. That was the first thing, not the only thing. But for some, it was enough. She wore sneakers, not heels. Her sweatshirt had a small stain near the sleeve. Her hair was in a protective wrap, and her carry-on looked like it had been through a dozen countries. To most people, she looked ordinary, maybe even a little out of place. And that's where the story split in two. Because while she stood calmly at the entrance, people around her were already writing the ending. She's probably trying to sneak in. Maybe she's someone's assistant. Or worse, she doesn't belong here. That's the danger of assumptions. They're fast, they're lazy, and too often they're wrong. It reminds me of something that happened in Switzerland not too long ago. Oprah Winfrey, one of the most recognizable women in the world, walked into a boutique. She asked to see a luxury handbag behind the counter. The clerk looked at her, just looked and said, "That's too expensive for you." She never asked her name. She just assumed, because sometimes people don't see you. They see your skin, your shoes, your silence, and they fill in the rest with a story they've told themselves too many times. It happens in airports, it happens in boardrooms, it even happens in neighborhoods we've lived in for decades. And here's the truth. Most people don't realize when they're doing it. It's like a reflex, but reflexes can hurt. And they did hurt because that day they didn't just deny her access, they denied her identity, but she didn't fight them with words. She didn't ask, would you treat me this way if I look different? She didn't need to, because what she carried wasn't just a badge, it was a story. One they hadn't earned the right to tell, but they were about to hear it anyway. Let me show you what happened next, and why silence when held with dignity can be louder than judgment ever will be. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't roll her eyes, or mutter under her breath. She didn't even ask for the manager. She just looked at the man blocking her path, paused for a breath, and reached slowly and quietly into her side bag. In a room full of noise, keyboards clicking, glasses clinking, small talk echoing, the moment went still. There was no announcement, no dramatic music, just the soft sound of a wallet unzipping, and then the unmistakable glint of a badge. That was it. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't need to, because the badge said everything they didn't ask. It said she was federal. It said she had clearance far beyond that lounge. It said she'd spent years training, protecting, serving, and they hadn't even let her walk through a glass door. You could feel the shift in the room. The whispers stopped. The smirks vanished. Even the guard stepped back, suddenly aware of his mistake but unsure of how to fix it. That's the power of silent dignity. It doesn't lash out. It doesn't perform. It simply stands still and lets the truth speak louder than the insult ever could. There's a lesson in that. In a world where outrage is currency and everyone wants to clap back, there's something profoundly moving about restraint, about choosing not to match someone's ignorance with your own, about letting who you are be louder than what they said. Think of Rosa Parks. She didn't scream on that bus, she just stayed seated. And in doing so, she stood taller than anyone in the room. This woman, this calm traveler, did the same. No shouting, no spectacle, just presence. And in that moment, everyone saw at the badge, yes, but more than that, her strength. But this moment wasn't just about the badge. It was about everything that led up to her carrying it. The years, the battles, the grit no one in that room could see. And if we're going to understand the full weight of that badge, we need to go back. Back to the long road that brought her here, because what was in her hand wasn't just metal, it was memory. Let's talk about that. A badge to most people is just metal, shiny, official, maybe impressive. But to the person who earns it, it's a story pressed into steel. That little piece of metal she held in her hand. It wasn't given, it was built. Built through long nights of studying while raising two kids. Through being the only black woman in rooms where everyone else wore the same suit and shared the same last names. Through being overlooked, talked over, doubted again and again. It's easy to see the badge and think, oh, she must be important. But the better question is, how many times was she told she never would be? Behind that quiet woman in the lounge was a younger girl who stayed late after class just to prove she could keep up, a cadet who finished her physical training with blood in her shoes, an officer who once sat across a table from a man who doubted her clearance, not because of her record, but because of her complexion. This wasn't just a badge. It was a memory of every door she wasn't allowed to open until she made her own key. It was a symbol of struggle, of resilience, of never giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing her quit. Think about how many people carry invisible badges every day. The janitor who built his family on night shifts, the nurse who still shows up even when the world forgets her name, the grandmother raising her grandkids while working two jobs, smiling through exhaustion. We don't see their badges, but they carry them in posture, in kindness, in perseverance. And maybe that's the question we all need to ask more often. How many people have we dismissed without ever knowing the battles they've already won? Because in that lounge, they didn't just misjudge a woman, they misjudged her journey, and that journey deserves to be heard. Because this story, it wasn't an isolated moment of discrimination. It's part of a pattern, one that keeps repeating every day in every corner of society. So let's take a closer look at why these moments happen and how the smallest assumptions can carry the deepest cuts. This wasn't the first time, and sadly, it won't be the last. Because what happened in that VIP lounge isn't just about one woman and one guard. It's part of a pattern, a quiet, constant hum beneath our daily lives. The kind of discrimination that wears a polite smile, speaks in customer service tone, and hides behind the phrase, "we're just following protocol." The truth is, our society has a long habit of assigning worth based on image, not substance. We say we value credentials, hard work, contribution, but too often what we notice first is complexion, clothing, posture, and in places of luxury like that lounge, the assumptions get even louder. There's a reason this happens in airports, five-star hotels, high-end stores. These are the spaces where belonging is silently policed, not by rules on paper, but by glances, raised eyebrows, and unspoken expectations. Think about the story of Dr. Tamika Cross, a young black physician who offered to help during a mid-flight medical emergency. The flight attendant told her, "Oh no, sweetie, we're looking for real doctors." She had the degree. She had the training. What she didn't have in their eyes was the look, or Victor White, a decorated Air Force veteran who was denied entry to a private club until he showed his military ID. Even then, the doorman asked, "Is this really yours?" These aren't rare stories, they're just rarely recorded. So why does this keep happening? Because bias doesn't always wear a hood or shout slurs. Sometimes it sounds like doubt, looks like hesitation, feels like cold politeness that says, "You don't fit here." The worst part, most people don't even realize they're doing it. That's how deep it runs. It's not always hatred. Sometimes it's inheritance, quietly passed down from generation to generation. And here's the most painful question of all. How many doors have we closed without even knowing we were the one holding the key? That's why this story matters, because it's not just about public embarrassment. It's about private conditioning, the small, subtle signals that tell someone they're not enough, even when they've given everything. But here's the power in knowing the why. Once we see the pattern, we can break it. And that begins by understanding just how much damage these moments do, especially when they come wrapped in smiles. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the quiet injuries that don't make headlines but change people forever. Not every wound bleeds, some cut deeper because they never even break the skin. Microaggressions, such a small word for such heavy damage. They're the daily comments, the sideways glances, the questions that seem harmless, until they pile up. Tiny moments of doubt, of exclusion, of being made to feel other. Like when someone says, "You're so articulate for someone like you." Or when a black man is asked, "Are you sure this is your car?" Or when a woman in uniform is mistaken for the cleaning staff while standing in front of her own office. These are not just slips of the tongue. They are reflections of something deeper. And when you live with them long enough, they begin to echo in your mind louder than the actual words. What's dangerous about microaggressions is that they are often dismissed by others and worse by ourselves. We brush them off. Maybe they didn't mean it like that. I'm being too sensitive. I shouldn't let it bother me. But the truth, it does bother you. Because being reminded every single day that the world sees you as less than, that leaves a mark. Studies show that microaggressions over time can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, even physical illness. It's like carrying a backpack of invisible bricks. And every time someone questions your worth, another brick goes in. Eventually, you start to question it too. You start to wonder, am I overreacting? Or am I just finally noticing what I've been taught to ignore? There's a story about a young black student at a prestigious university. He was asked 3 times in one day if he was there to deliver food, even while wearing a university hoodie. He didn't get angry, he just got quiet. And that quiet started to grow into something heavier: self-doubt, isolation, resentment. Because the cost of microaggressions isn't just emotional, it's relational, it's cultural. It's the quiet drift between people who should be allies but end up on opposite sides of the same hallway. But here's the lesson we often miss. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do isn't to speak, it's to pause and listen, to examine where our reflexes come from, to notice our assumptions before we act on them. Because when we take responsibility for the small things, like words, glances, silence, we begin to protect people in big ways. And in that airport lounge, no one yelled. No one cursed, but something still hurt, and that hurt, it lingers longer than most realize. Now here's the deeper question. If you could see the weight people carry, would you still speak to them the same way? Let's keep going, because what this woman did next wasn't loud, but it was unforgettable. And it reminded everyone in that room what true power looks like when dignity takes the lead. Silence can feel uncomfortable. It can stretch across a room like a shadow, making people shift in their seats, clear their throats, check their phones. But sometimes, silence doesn't mean absence. It means power. In that moment when she revealed her badge and said nothing, something remarkable happened. The silence became hers. It wasn't awkward. It was intentional. It filled the room with something that words couldn't reach. That's the thing about dignity. It doesn't need to argue. It doesn't need to prove anything. It just stands and lets truth settle like dust after a storm. We live in a time when voices rise quickly. Social media rewards, outrage TV panels turn every issue into a shouting match. But every now and then, someone shows us a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't raise its voice to be heard. Think about Rosa Parks. She didn't curse or scream. She just stayed in her seat. And yet her silence echoed louder than 1,000 speeches, because silence, when held with confidence and clarity, becomes a statement. There's also the story of James Blake, the professional tennis player who was wrongfully tackled by a plainclothes officer outside a New York hotel. He didn't yell, he didn't resist. He stood up, dusted off, and calmly said, "I hope this opens up a conversation." His restraint wasn't weakness, it was his choice. And that made all the difference. Silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it's discipline. Sometimes it's a gift we give to ourselves to protect our peace, our focus, our power. Because here's the truth. When you carry yourself with quiet dignity, you force the world to adjust its volume. You teach others to listen more carefully. You challenge assumptions, not by confrontation, but by presence. And that's what she did in front of people who didn't see her worth. She didn't flinch. She didn't break. She let them sit in the silence of their own assumptions. And that silence, it said everything. So here's a question worth holding on to. When was the last time your silence taught someone a lesson your words never could? Because sometimes we think power comes from what we say, but real power, lasting power, often comes from what we don't say. Still, this story isn't just about one woman. It's about something much bigger. It's about a culture, a pattern, and a truth we all need to face. Because what happened in that lounge wasn't personal, it was systemic. And the real question is, who really belongs in the VIP room, and who decides, let's take a step back and ask something simple. What does VIP really mean? Very important person. But who decides what important looks like? Is it the person in the designer suit with a platinum credit card? Or is it the teacher flying home after grading 100 essays, exhausted but proud? Is it the CEO in first class or the single mother in economy, holding a child in one arm and a college degree in the other? Somewhere along the way, we've confused access with value. We've built rooms with velvet ropes and golden plaques, and then we've built stories around who we think deserves to walk through them, but true worth can't be scanned at a door. It's not something printed on a boarding pass. It's something lived through service, through struggle, through showing up when no one else does. And that woman in the lounge, she had the badge. But long before she ever held it, she had something even more powerful: character, resilience, humility, and presence. It makes you wonder, how many people have we walked past without realizing they were the wisest, strongest, or most courageous in the room? Because the truth is, VIP status has nothing to do with where you sit. It has everything to do with how you live. The man at the door thought he was protecting a space, but he wasn't guarding a lounge. He was guarding a lie. The lie that worth can be measured by wealth or appearance. And the moment she stepped in, with quiet confidence and earned authority, that lie crumbled. She didn't just enter the lounge, she redefined it. That's the thing about spaces. They're only as meaningful as the people we welcome into them. And sometimes the real VIPs are the ones who never ask to be seen, but leave the deepest impression when they are. So next time we think about who belongs where, maybe we should stop asking what someone has and start asking who they are. Because when we do that, when we see with deeper eyes, we start to change, not just rooms, we change culture. And that shift, it doesn't begin with walls, it begins with us. But this story still isn't over. Because as powerful as her moment was, it wasn't just about her, it was about something greater. Something that touches all of us, whether we realize it or not. Let's talk about that next. It's easy to hear a story like this and think, wow, that must have been hard for her. But this story, it isn't just hers. It belongs to all of us because we've all been in a room where we felt unseen, where someone looked right through us or only at the surface. Maybe it was the job interview where they assumed we weren't a good fit, the meeting where our idea got credited to someone else, the restaurant where we waited longer, got fewer smiles, felt less welcome. And sometimes it's not even about race or gender or status. It's just the feeling of not being recognized for who you truly are. This story taps into something deeper, that human longing to be seen clearly, not for what we wear or where we sit or what badge we carry, but for our worth, for our story, for our dignity. When she stood silently in that lounge, what she revealed wasn't just injustice, she revealed a mirror, a reflection of how quickly we judge, how often we assume, how rarely we slow down to ask, who is this person really? And maybe you've been on both sides of that mirror. Maybe you've been overlooked, and maybe you've done the overlooking. That's what makes this story powerful, because it doesn't point fingers, it opens hearts, it invites us to look closer, listen longer, and live more intentionally, to catch those quiet moments where we get to choose, assume, or connect, dismiss, or honor. It also reminds us that behind every face is a story we haven't heard yet, and every time we let someone's story surprise us, we grow. So here's the question that lingers long after the badge was shown, long after the silence settled. What if the next person you're about to ignore is the very person who could change your perspective? Because the real power of this moment isn't just about justice served, it's about awareness awakened. And if we carry that forward, maybe the next lounge, the next hallway, the next room won't need a badge to prove someone's worth. And that leads us to one final thought. Not just about what we saw, but about what we must do next. The lounge was just a room, a space with soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and polished floors. But what happened inside it, the assumptions, the silence, the shift echoes far beyond its walls. Because truthfully, we all walk through rooms like that every day. They just don't always have velvet ropes or frosted glass doors. Sometimes it's the boardroom, sometimes it's a classroom, sometimes it's a conversation where someone's voice gets lost before it's even heard. And while we may not be able to change every system overnight, we can change the way we move through them. It starts small, it starts quiet, it starts with looking a little longer before we judge, with listening not just to words but to silence, with asking ourselves, am I making space or taking it away? There's a story about a teacher who every year spends the first week of school learning every student's name, pronunciation, background, and family story. Not because it's required, but because she says, I can't teach someone I refuse to see. That's what this is about, seeing. Because when we truly see someone, not just their role or race or resume, but their full humanity, we begin to shift the culture around us. Bit by bit, room by room, this story of the woman and her badge. It's a reminder that power doesn't always come with volume, that presence can speak louder than proof, and that true dignity, when lived fully, changes people even if it never raises its voice. So here's the question we're left with. What kind of rooms are we building for others and for ourselves? Are they rooms of judgment or understanding, of silence or solidarity, of exclusion or welcome? Because the real challenge isn't to make more VIP rooms, it's to make fewer locked doors. So as you move through the world today, through airports, offices, streets, or even your own home, ask yourself, who am I letting in? Who am I listening to? And how can I leave the door just a little more open than I found it? Because that's how change begins. Not with a badge, but with a choice. If this story made you pause, even for a moment, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you've been through, then don't let it stop here. Share this story with one person who still believes in quiet strength. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been judged before anyone knew your name? Like if you believe dignity doesn't need to shout, and if stories like this matter to you, subscribe because we tell them every single week. Because sometimes the loudest change begins in the quietest room. And maybe you're the one who can hold that door open for someone else. We'll see you in the next story.